So we took that, we went with the management plan, we thinned to the management plan, but we also created a shaded fuel break. In doing this, we combined fire mitigation and thinning, so to keep the wildfire down before it got to the house. Yes?
Is he allowing people to maybe modify their management plans? Because a lot of these management plans are
Yes.
old, aren't they?
They do need to be updated, but that's a Carson question for sure.
Yeah, sometimes we'll do an addendum to a plan, which will incorporate sort of an evaluation of the current inventory, or current state of this thing, and we may, based on my recommendations, modify the timeline. Because sometimes they're unrealistic, or natural events come in and change the condition of the forest. So yeah, that idea is accepted.
That's good.
So this job was three plus acres. Took about 8 days to do the job. Cost was about $1,600 per acre on this, and no cost recovery. This is what the guy paid. He wrote a check for this at the end. See all the stalking? This is the issue. This is the issue the county had with it. Lots of different species of trees, but all you see is trees. It's all green. And so you have small trees, you have medium trees, you have large trees, no spacing in between, very overstocked. From a fire potential standpoint, full ladder fuels. It will burn very hot and very damaging if a fire started there. This is the upper side of the unit. Not quite so thick, but you can see the multi-generations in here. There's a lot of different generations of trees. All natural reseed. This area was logged in about '85 probably, and pretty well clear cut during that time. These trees would have been saplings when it was cut, and they were left behind. So the slope meant fire could travel up it faster. It also is where we're concentrating our thinning efforts by doing 100 feet on either side of the road and leaving the road in between the house and the rest of the undeveloped area over several properties. Had a fire come up that hill, it'd probably pretty much stopped at the road because there wasn't enough fuel to keep it going up to the road, a hard fire break in the middle, and then on the other side the same thing. Very limited area to burn. We staged everything. It's a pretty efficient way to do it. Drag it all the road, and then we used a chipper in this job instead of burning because it was more efficient. For the amount of material and how close the road was to it, we were able to drive right down past it and chip it out, which saved money on this particular job. So there's multiple ways to handle your slash. This is the end result. You can see that there's still some other generational trees in here. We left some understory, but we disrupted that whole middle canopy, so there's no more ladder fuels anymore. The timber that's here is going to get bigger because we spaced it out some more. It's got a lot more nutrients. It's not competing so much. And another picture of the end result down the hill. You can see that there's a nice wide open area, very low ground fuels, very low timber competition compared to what there was before. It was probably, I don't know, there's probably 200 yards of chips that came off of this job. That rolls into my other hat, but you'll see that they combine with each other. People up here are scared of fire. You just start a burn pile and see how many calls get called in about it. They're just scared of fire. Well, what we want to do, fire's good. Carson talked about it a little bit. Our stands are supposed to have fire. What we want is this, a nice little ecological burn, burns out the thatch grass, gets rid of invasive species, promotes timber growth. What we don't want is King 5 looking down on Orcas Island. The problem is right now with our stocking, it's possible. It's not going to have a big raging crown fire, and that's actually in Florida, but it's not going to be a big raging crown fire, but you could definitely torch out a half acre at a time, and you could make some pretty impressive looking flame wings. But what's the difference between timber stand thinning and wildfire mitigation, or that pre-commercial thinning? There's not. It depends on who I'm talking to. If I want to be a salesman about it, I ask somebody where they're from, they say Berkeley. I'm like, hey, we need to fire mitigate your stand. And they're scared as hell of fire. You say fire to anybody from Southern California and they think the world's going to burn down. So, it's a sales pitch. But from that and managing your forest to a healthy timber stand, it's the same thing. A pre-commercial thinning does the same thing in a fire ground as it does to promote the forest health. And it does not mean that you need a single age stand. You don't need to have everything big or everything small. You can mix it up. You just need to plan your stand accordingly to disrupt those. Wildfire tetrahedron. I put that in because it's a fancy word. It makes me sound smart. All it really is it's a three-dimensional triangle, which means that it's because fire is not just, it's not flat. It's not that tabletop. There's dimensions to it. And so we'll get into that just a little bit. Heat, fuel, weather, fuel arrangement, topography. That equals fire spread. So what can we do about fire in our forest timber stands to promote both forestry and fire? Disrupt the ladder. So the ladder principle pretty much explains wildfire growth. Starts on the ground. The ground almost always carries the fire to begin with, and in different spots it'll contribute to its spread. It gets in the smaller timber, or the reprod, or the up here the ocean spray, the brush. And because our timber is so tight, it stands above it, and that burns the big timber. That's what you see in the Rockies. Overstock stands, disease, other things that contribute to it, and fire just runs through it like crazy. If we disrupt that and change this a little bit, then it can't get up in the trees. We could take my 5-gallon propane torch with a big brush burner on it, stick it against the base of a fir tree, and walk away. And I would bet that torch will run out of propane before the tree catches on fire. Trees don't like to burn. They're made to have fire around them. But the fuels and the fuel arrangement is exactly what causes us to have these catastrophic bad burns, and we have the potential here to do it. So vertical arrangement is the ground up. That's from on the floor all the way to the top of the crown, and in that fashion. The ladder is a vertical arrangement, the fuel ladder. The horizontal arrangement refers to how it flows on the ground and up in the crown. If you have really tight crown spacing, you have a horizontal up in the crown, but on the ground is all your sticks and stuff. That's what carries the fire. So the horizontal arrangement is the big deal. That's where our pre-commercial thinning and everything else comes in. 3 types of fuels, very boiled down. You got ground fuels, surface fuels, and crown fuels. The ground ones are the ones on or in the ground. The duff that's this thick, the logs laying on the ground, the twigs that are decomposing, they're not a big deal. They might catch on fire, but it's going to be really slow. When we walk up, we'll have to dig it out, but it's there. It's not going to burn your house down. The surface fuels is what's going to carry this fire. These are the trees, the bushes, the piles, the 3 feet of slash. Anything that's above the ground level that's not in the decay state is a surface fuel. The grass, all the heavy carriers, those are in the surface fuels. The crown fuels refer to in the tops of the trees. Once again, ladder area. And also in the timber thinning world, this is the understory. Now we don't have to take the understory out, but we can disrupt it and it'll promote forestry. With no timber management, somewhere up in the Rockies or the Cascades, you can see fire on the ground, fire in the middle, fire up in the treetops. If you don't manage your stand, fire burns through in a catastrophic fashion. If you do manage your stand, this is either a burnout or a broadcast burn done on purpose, and probably a broadcast burn. The only reason I know that is there's a fire line along it. See all the spacing, no ladder fuels, fire's only a couple feet high. This is like sweeping your floor. You sweep the floor of the house, you get the dirt off of it and throw it out. That's pretty much the same thing. Very healthy in this stand. In fact, this happens to be ponderosa, and without it, the seeds wouldn't pop, and you wouldn't get a new generation in that particular tree type. It's healthy to have fire, as long as we use it properly. So, a selective harvest, putting this back to fire and timber together. Selective harvest disrupts the fuel in a positive way. You can change those ladders, you can change the tree spacings, you can do all sorts of stuff to mimic what fire would have done had it been there. And that's the big point. If we can mimic the same effects of fire, you're not getting the nitrogen and stuff from the ash, but you're at least mimicking what it does and what shouldn't be there. You're going to have a lot of positive stuff. Thinning from above, you can do it that way, and you can get rid of your fire because you're spacing your trees out. They're going to be healthier. You're not going to have a continuous field bed. You're going to have higher value timber, but it's not going to. It's just not going to look the same as a forest. Up here, well designed combination, thinning across the diameters. That's the 10th time or 12th time we said thinning across the diameters today. It's the best way to arrange the fields for a fire perspective and arrange your forest in a forest arrangement perspective to mimic what fire would have done at one time and to promote your growth. So pre-commercial thinning, what's it do? Just side to side, promotes the growth of timber, promotes straighter, higher value timber. That's a big key. The straighter and nicer looking your timber is, the more money it's worth. Can promote stand diversity depending on how you plant it. Reduces the overstocking, which is our main problem up here. We carry about 3 times the amount of timber on the ground than we should. We need to reduce that if you want to have a healthy forest and prevent the disease and infestations. The park, I will say that with the laminated root rot in the park. If they had thinned it when it started showing up, it moves about 3 feet a year, you wouldn't be seeing the clear cut that you're seeing now. If you mitigate the problem and with management, you don't see the same problems. And you can use it to promote habitat diversity. You don't have to cut everything. You don't have to cut everything on the ground. You don't have to cut everything up high. You don't have to cut all the brush out. You need to leave all that to have a healthy ecosystem. In the wildfire, a pre-commercial changes the vertical and horizontal environment, makes a shaded fuel break, for lack of a better term. It'll slow the fire spread down and or the intensity of it, make it a healthy burn even if it burns fast, and it keeps the intensity around the habitat preserved. If it's thinned out, the fire can't run through everything continuously. In a big fire, we call it moonscaping. It burns everything and 3 inches of dirt. It burns the dirt out, burns the nutrients out. It takes 10 to 15 years to get that back.
Does it qualify for the assessor's demands for income?
Pre-commercial thinning goes along with your forest plan, which is part of qualifying for the assessor. Correct, Carson?
Yeah.
What I see is you need to harvest so much every 10 or 15 years in my forest plan. It doesn't say anything about differentiating between harvesting and pre-commercial thin.
Right. That's more a plan talk. That's more Carson's part than mine to explain that.
Sounds like you need a new
difference.
plan.
It kind of depends on who wrote your plan too. There's been a lot of that issue with some people writing the plan. There was some association that wrote a few plans I've seen that the assessor just doesn't want to take. They take conservation side to like an extreme, and you're in DFL. Realize if you're in DFL, you're getting tax breaks because your property is being designed to grow and harvest timber. Period. That's what it's there for. Open space timber is a little different. The rules are a little bit different. But DFL, if you're in that, you are designed to grow timber. You have told the county, the state, and everybody else that it might take me 100 years or 50 years, but my property is going to not be developed and it's going to be raising timber. That's why they're going to give you that break.
The specific word they use is commerce between 2 parties. DFL land requires commerce between 2 parties. You don't have to make money, you can break even, you can lose money, but it has to be with an outside party. The word is commerce. And that was given to us specifically by the gal at our last presentation. I forget her name.
Carol
Strong. She was wonderful. So she's a person truly to get in touch with and use as a resource on these particular questions. But she used very specific language that was quite compelling. Just to clarify.
So if you just sell firewood off of a thinning, you've satisfied that,
That's
correct?
commerce.
That's
You have to
commerce. Now,
sell it.
Well, if
You have to sell it.
you
Yeah.
can sell it.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
that being said, realize
can't be your
firewood still
own.
requires a permit. It's a different kind of permit, but anytime you sell timber from your place, it leaves your property. Some revenue is made off of it. You're supposed to have it inside a permit. Okay? So that's the main thing on the permit side of things. You can sell everything firewood. In fact, firewood's about the highest value you can get out here with our local timber, whether it's that nice or not. But firewood by the cord is worth some money.
John Willis getting his permit?
Yeah, John's got a permit.
Absolutely, Wally.
Where you guys want to understand that is that you're in the program already. You want that permit. It might cost you a few bucks, but you want that permit because when the state or the county comes to you, and says, well, what are you doing? I says, well, I've been selling firewood. Well, where's your proof? Where's your receipts? Where's that piece of paper that says it was legal in the first place? Because if you don't have that proof, they might call up DNR and say, hey, this guy says he's sold 1,400 cords of firewood in 20 years off of this particular piece of property. And I say, oh, really? Well, we don't have a permit for that. Then they come find you. So you want to do it down the right channels, especially being in the program, because it's the only way that you can prove that you're doing your stuff correctly. So this last job we're going to run through real quick is Kulik's jobs. It's very top of Buck Mountain, and it's exactly combining everything we just talked about between forest thinning and fire mitigation. This is what we thinned out. This is pine. This pine, I would challenge anybody here to count how many rings are in this piece of pine. It's somewhere around 120. This is very top up towards the towers. And intermixed in that pine was a fir stand that's probably 50 or 60 years old. It was what naturally reseeded and came back in under the pine stand. So the point of this was to get rid of the pine. The pine was full of a lot of disease. There was a lot of red ring rot, and a lot of mistletoe. So it's got a disease ridden from being too overstocked. There's too many trees per acre, especially up there where it's a lot of bedrock, very little soil. There's a lot of competition. And they're starting to show a lot of dying off in the pine. It's reached its maturity. It's not worth any money. It wasn't really worth the money to get the logs out. And because of the way we're going to thin the site, the steepness and stuff, and what the homeowner wanted at the end, this is around her house, she didn't want the ground all tore up. So we went with a pre-commercial style instead of commercially using the timber. So the pine shows lots of decay, and the fir was very small. The fir was all looking like this, and it's probably 60 to 70 years old. It's just small because there's too many trees up there. So benefit of it was remove the pine that was decaying, promote the fir growth. All the work was done by hand, so we didn't disturb the ground. Job size so far is 2 acres with probably another 6 or 8 coming up. 1,600 an acre before burning. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of stems that came out of this. Chainsaws and laborers, that's it. No equipment on it. So before, you can see how many stems there are. This is about 50-50 pine and fir. You can see all the fuels that are on the ground mixed all the way up through the canopy. And there's some young regeneration, but it's a lot of hemlock and stuff that's shade tolerant. And it's not really growing very well. It's just adding to the problem of too many stems on the ground. This is below the house before thinning. Remember, fire's topography based. We can't change topography, we can't change weather, we can't change any of that, but we can change how much fuel's in between. So that's what we did here. It's a pretty steep slope. We're standing up actually right next to the house. And with that constant fuel bed and all that decaying pine and everything else, it was going to make for a very hot fire to run at the house. So we changed it to a shaded fuel break, but you can see all the airspace now that we opened up. All that airspace is going to allow those trees to get out and reach out a little farther and grow. It'd be the same thing. You folks would probably be a lot more comfortable if we had a room about half the size of the gym. Your chairs could be another couple feet apart. Think of a timber stand the same way. You're all sitting next to each other. You're sure not going to spread out, and if a wind blew through here, you'd be bumping into each other all the time, fracturing your limbs, making more damage. And then you got to look at the base. What holds a tree up? Trees can't get taller without getting wider. If they get wider, the root base has to get wider. If it's running into your neighbor constantly under the ground, you're all fighting over the same nutrients, you're not going to get any bigger. So this was after thin below the house. This is looking, this is right behind the house, so it's a lot heavier thin because we wanted to really disrupt that fuel around the house. You can see we slash piled it all, but you can see all the slough that's all still through here. Top of Buck Mountain, like I said, I'm burning it in the snow or the really heavy rain. The fires don't extend past these burn piles, and they just burn themselves out. And so in the spring, that slough will definitely retake over all those ash piles, and you won't even, probably 2 years, you won't even know it happened except for the fact that there's going to be some stumps. Like I said, real close to the house is actually the drain field right behind us. So the house sits in the middle, and we thinned over here. If the square is a house, we thin these 2 sides of the house. For topography reasons and fuel loading reasons, we took those 2 acres first. This is looking from the back end of the unit straight back at the house. Before the project, you couldn't see this far ahead. You couldn't see the house at all. You can see all the airspace. This was taken a couple days ago when it was really cloudy, but you can see all the airspace up here. These trees are going to be able to start reaching out. Their canopies are very short. They're 20% or less for aerial canopies of the height of the tree. They're going to start, if you go up there in a couple years, their limbs are going to start working their way down the tree. More health, more photosynthesis, more roots underground, all equals a little bit healthier stand. Bottom side of the unit, we're also working on habitat up there. There really isn't any. It's pretty sterile ground. So like this brush pile will probably stay, and several brush piles are going to stay. This old retention snag, heritage snag if you will, is going to stay. It's already got a lot of bird holes in it, and so you know the bugs and birds are using it. They really wanted to try and promote some some more bird species up there. The easiest way to do that is to leave a couple slash piles and just let them rot and decay away, and then birds can build their nests and so on and so forth. We're leaving a lot of these logs, large diameter logs on the ground. Large diameter up there is pretty small, but that's another part of the healthy ecosystem. Squirrels need a place to live, everything else, if you want to make an ecosystem friendly forest, needs a place to go. So we also have lots of places, we took these bigger logs and stacked them up and made a big tall log to mimic what would have been an old growth log. And from the ecosystem, then that's what that's mimicking. There's EQIP programs for that. As you guys go through for making slash piles, making habitat, it's a big part of the ecosystem side of forestry. You don't always have to log to have a good, healthy forest. That being said, this in 50 years, and probably about 15 years, it should be re-cut and cut again. And then in 50 years, we'll have some very nice timber for the top of Buck Mountain on it. This is looking back up, and you can see all the moss. It's kind of hard to see, the resolution's not great on the screen. But all the moss and ground area we didn't disturb. We didn't kick up a lot of dirt. All the moss is still kind of there. We did it in July and August, so the ground was really firm. We didn't do any disruption down here. There's still a lot of ground fuel. A fire can still burn in this, but it's going to burn about that tall and be very unimpressive, which is good. We want unimpressive fire right below your house when you live on a slope. The timber, it has no chance of getting up in the timber itself. We left several generations. You see trees this big and you see trees this big, so it's a multi-generational stand. So it was set up with all points in mind. The current forestry for the future, and what we currently have. Excuse me, check the time there. So we're almost through the last slide. And this was the last picture. This is looking across about the broadest part of the unit, the broadest picture I can get. You can see there's a lot of slash piles. Could we leave those there and drive away? Yeah, they'd rot. From a fire standpoint, is it more hazardous? Kinda, not really, because it's all piled in what we call jackpots. So a fire has to get into it, and then it'd burn it out, and they'd probably throw fire embers, and you might light a bunch off. It might become a management issue, but it's also not going to probably burn these trees. So it's also kind of a thing you can deal with that over several years. Once it's piled up, you as a homeowner can go burn them. I mean, you can burn 2 or 3 or 20 a winter, and just as you got to it. They're not going to hurt anything to sit there. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. This happens to be the current site that I've just finished out in Eagle Lake, where my family's been logging about 60 years now. And we're going through where the camp mills went through in the 40s, and they did a heavy clear cut, but now it's come up with a pretty equal mix of hemlock that's decaying because of over-competition and disease, and fir that is suppressed because there's too many stems an acre. So now we're promoting the fir growth out there so we can get nice and big. They like old growth forestry. At the same time, we thinned on purpose so that if some point they wanted to cut, they'd have a very high value piece of timberland. It all works together. Fire mitigation, healthy timberland, productive and profitable forest. It's all the same thing. Just depends on how you want to spin it. You can do it all at one time, which makes it financially a little bit more feasible. There's also some fire-wise grants besides the stuff Kirk can offer you. But if you're talking shaded fuel breaks, you use the right terminology with the right people, there's more money available. If you're below a housing development or you're trying to protect your neighborhood, protect the state park, you could add into there maybe some fire-wise stuff. Like I said, pre-commercial thinning and fire-wise, it's the same thing, just a different term. There's some different coin available depending on how you work that. Any questions? I know we kind of blew through everything. This is a 8-day class. If we wanted to stretch it out and bore everybody to tears.
We have about 10 minutes or so for questions if folks have any for either Carson or Rich.
What kind of grant money's available?
So I mentioned this one particular program called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. There's some sheets over there if they're still available. It is money that comes through the Farm Bill, and it's managed by the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They used to be called the Soil Conservation Service. The local office here is in Cedro Woolley or Mount Vernon, I forget which. And it's called a cost share program. You submit an application. If you are selected for funding, they pay you a set amount of money for a variety of different practices. Again, pre-commercial thinning, pruning trees to reduce ladder fuels, planting trees, installing bird boxes, creating habitat piles, et cetera, et cetera. They pay you a set amount per practice. If you hire a contractor and it costs more, you pay the difference, and that's why it's called a cost share program.
Okay.
The federal government essentially sharing in the cost. The program, you can apply to the program all year round, anytime. You can submit an application tomorrow. They have a once-a-year application deadline, after which they rank all the applications. It's a competitive funding program, and if your project meets the conservation objectives of the NRCS for this area, then they will award you funding. If it doesn't, you may not get funding, so it's not a guarantee. It's useful to contact the office and ask them what their priorities are for a given year to see whether or not you have a chance of getting funding. Right now, they're putting a lot of their money focused on in-stream and salmon habitat. If you have streams in your property, likely your project will rank higher. I also mentioned that they will pay for forest management plans. So if you are funded to develop a management plan, and then you reapply to implement some of the conservation recommendations in that plan, your subsequent application will rank a little higher since you've gone through that initial planning process. So it's kind of a twofer there. I mean, it's great to get a plan to get oriented in what you want to do in the first place, and better chance of getting funding after that. There are other funding pools out there. The Conservation District occasionally has money, or can partner with you to do various projects. Do you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, the district, at the Conservation District, we are in Friday Harbor. We help people with their EQIP applications.
Okay.
And we also have a Washington State Conservation Commission offers cost share for best management practices if you can't do the whole suite.
Okay.
So we have a list for that.
All right.
Other questions?
Yeah, Eric.
Eric?
Hi, Kirk. I missed the first workshop that you guys had, but somebody mentioned this Carol Strom person as a resource. Is she at the assessor's office?
She is.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
She's in charge of their special programs, as in DFL, open space, and ag.
Okay,
That's
good.
her, kind of her baby over there. So she, instead of Charles, she's really the one you want to talk to in the
Okay,
office.
good.
She was super clear, very helpful, difficult topic with a lot of nuances, and it was more than I could get in one sitting. She's a fantastic resource, and I thought she was very level-headed in her presentation. It's a hard job.
I'm working on the agriculture side of things, and I hesitate to say this, but I recommend that everybody get any communication between them and the assessor in writing. It's,
Thank you.
And email does that
we're running
automatically.
into huge problems on the ag side,
And same at the Conservation District. It's very advisable to be very clear
and get it in writing.
the information they're giving you.
Don't just count on a phone conversation.
Email's a good thing.
Email's much better.
Eric, you
I was just want to ask about the assessor again. I mean, I know that the philosophy behind the DFL program is to defer the annual taxes until you get stumpage taxes at time of harvest, and that's assuming that's what the assessor would love to see with decent taxes. But if you're following your plan and doing fire mitigation and road building and these types of things, it sounds like from what Rich said that that's going to satisfy the assessor as long as you're following your plan.
Well,
and-
satisfying the assessor is up to the assessor. Let's start with that one right there. It's up to their interpretation of your plan. The more that you can back up what you said you did, pictures, digital cameras are wonderful things. You go through a stand, take a picture before, take a picture after, this is the work that was done, put it in a file, and if you, not to bombard the assessor with paperwork,
Go
but
ahead.
when they ask you that questionnaire, they send you that questionnaire, and you can send back a file. This is my last 10 years of my forest management. They're gonna look at that and either say, okay, you're fine, or maybe they look through it, and then maybe they want to come visit and give you some proof, but the more evidence you can show of cost going out, cost coming in, any of that kind of stuff in paper, the better off you're gonna be with the assessor's office.
But like Kai said, it's about commerce too though.
Right.
Because when I talked to her this week, she's very clearly said that it doesn't matter if you do anything on your own for yourself, there has to be some commerce. You can't just go cut and say it was my firewood, or I cleared, did some pre-commercial thinning. If you don't have any proof that you did that, it's not gonna fly with them. And the other thing that she told me too, if you're filling out that paperwork, and you have a management plan, don't just say, refer to management plan. She said if you do that, she's gonna throw it right back at you. Those questions that are in there, she said, are specific, and they want answers to them to prove that you've done something. Cause I have a management plan, and she's looked it over, and she said, if I asked, just review that, or just, is that good enough? She said, no, it's not good enough.
They wanna see activity. That's what they're basing on, partly because it's been so long. It's been a long time since they've looked at it, now they're playing catch up, so the easiest way to do that is an activity log of some sort. Whether it be stumpage slips or scale slips from past harvest or what, but it makes it easy for them to, basically, what they're wanting to do, her plan is to start everybody, you're starting at 0. You might be in the program, but you're starting everybody on the same level. Once they get this initial process done, then they'll be able to come back every 3, 5, 10 years, send the questionnaire out every 5 years, and you say, yeah, this is what I've done, here's the paperwork that proves this is what I've done, send it back, and they'll make their job in the future easier. That's the theory behind it.
I think there's a real drive for revenue too. I'm just actually in the process of taking the land out of DFL. So we were gonna do a title change, and so it automatically goes to the assessor when you do that. And so I just had the plan approved by the assessor 3 years ago, so it's Charles, same assessor. And they said, well, your goals don't really meet the program, the idea. And our goals were very clear in the plan, that it was for forest health and wildlife habitat, and not primarily for growing of timber. And so they said, this does not qualify.
That's right.
So,
Yes.
yet they approved it. So obviously, I think what's happening is the county is looking for money, and they have really put the screws to this. And it's unfortunate because in a lot of cases, in San Juan County, we've got little pieces of forest land. And, 20 acres is not very much, especially if some of it's a wetland and some of it's steep slopes, and you can't effectively go a lot of trees or log them, which is our case. So it's a tough thing, and so I just said, well, in the end, the tax break is not worth trying to deal these guys in this particular way. It doesn't mean I'm not gonna follow the management plan, but they're not recognizing the other components of I think, the benefits of keeping land well managed as forest land that's not necessarily gonna generate much or any excise tax revenue.
Now, there is a current use tax program for that. It's called the Open Space Program, and it doesn't have the same requirement for the commercial production of timber. So that is more for folks that wanna keep their land undeveloped and in a natural state, but not necessarily produce timber. And it is still a very, very low tax rate. I don't know or think it's comparable to DFL, but it's still is lower, and far lower than, of course, residential is.
Right, although they suggested that to me, so I looked at it. There's a $4,000 application to start, and then they have a whole checklist, and it's actually very difficult, and our land wouldn't qualify. Even though it has a Cascade Creek runs through it, and has a wetland, and it still wouldn't qualify, not enough points. So there's a lot of issues there, but, so it's a tricky thing. I just say, if you have a management plan, or if you're thinking about it, be very careful how you do this, because they are looking for money, and that's what's driving this. I had a lot of discussions with Carol and with Charles, and I just said, in the end, forget it, we're just not gonna keep at this,
Well, I have a couple of comments. Question about your plan, so you're managing it for wildlife and old growth. In a sense, you're still managing it, so it could be rewritten in such a way as you're thinking it, or you're doing whatever you want to try to develop those qualities. Is that true?
A management plan?
Yeah.
Sure, a management plan can
So
be written
management
for
can
any
have any kind of
objectives.
goals,
Whether or
but-
not that management plan then qualifies
Mhm.
for a current use program is another thing.
So it's how you write it.
Sure, it comes to, ultimately, I think a landowner needs to decide, what are your objectives for your land first? What do you wanna do with it? And then you have to look at the context that land is being managed in. If you do wanna qualify for DFL, well, then you may need to change your objectives and say, well, I do need to manage for commercial timber production. That actually needs to be the primary intent of my management in order to qualify. If I'm not interested in commercial timber production, I more want wildlife habitat, old growth, then it may be more of an open space category or some other, if there are other current use options like that. Or again, if you have other objectives altogether, you may not qualify for either of those, but, you know, that's where you need to start first, is figuring out what your objectives are.
But the penalties are so significant if you blow, it's 10 years of the current,
7.
no, it's 10.
Oh, is it 10 in
It's
GFL?
10 for
Okay,
GFL.
sorry.
That's okay, ag land's different a little bit. Yeah, 10 years of your current tax, so it's not the tax you paid 10 years ago, it's this year. So you take the taxes you paid this year and you multiply it times 10, and that's what Carol and Charles want as a check, if you blow it.
There is an appeal process, and there are months of back and forth paperwork between parties before that does engage. That does not reduce the impact.
And the other thing is, if you're in the process of selling your property, and you haven't, and you have to get Charles to sign off that you've been actively managing your plan, and you haven't been, well, guess what? You don't have time to make your appeal. You're gonna pay a huge penalty.
And I will say that Charles, I've worked on several spots in Lopez, here and other places now. I will say that the assessor's office, for going after people, is kind of being kind of nice about it. In the fact that they're giving you options. They're not just saying, I mean, by all rights, they could just send you a bill. Say, that's it, this is the law.
Speak for yourself, Rich.
Well, on the jobs I've worked on,
Yeah.
they gave them time to get Carson in there to manage, to work on the management plan. I went into jobs after that and mitigated them. They signed it off. So there has been,
It's taken no small amount of finessing though.
Right.
It has.
And
It's
Carson
a
and
delicate-
Rich are very good at the finessing.
yeah, but it's, pictures are good.
Maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll have to get to, how to get to where we're going next. Anybody have any other?
I just wanna add, you know, people, if they're in DFL and they want to switch, they can switch into another program without paying the penalties and back taxes. They do have to pay if they're going into the open, they have to pay that 4,000.
The application, but yeah, I believe
Yeah,
you
but
can.
still, you're not paying your 10 years of back taxes, so.
Okay, so just some last reminders again. There's two things I'm looking for from folks here over the next several months. One is any kind of contacts for businesses, people in the forest products industry that would like to have their services, their products, their equipment, you know, what have you, made available or promoted. Again, pick up one of these sheets here, grab some extras, pass those around. We'll be sending out an email. You can forward that on to other folks. If you want to sign up for a free up to 2-hour site visit when I come back next time, just send me an email, give me a phone call, I'll get you on the calendar. If you want to get somebody out of your ground right away, obviously Rich and Carson are local here. They can come out and work with you.
Is that just Orcas?
These guys cover the whole county as far as I know.
Carson more than me, but I definitely contracted on Lopez and stuff.
But in terms of the free
Yeah,
site
for
visit.
myself, if I can get several people on one of the other islands, then I can. It won't be efficient for me just to go for one, but if there are 3 people in San Juan or what have you, sure, I could do that. Then the last thing is for the tour that we're gonna be putting together. If you have a site, be it you've done some kind of forest management, you have a mill site, you're doing manufacturing, you have a home that was built with local wood, or you know somebody that fits any of those categories, please let me know. We're gonna start putting together that list of options for the tour later this summer, and I'd like to get that sooner than later so we can get that firmed up. So I think that's,
One more question on the back.
oh yeah, Carol.
In the last time you were here, you had also talked about, you know, mostly we've been trying to grow Doug firs. You talked also about doing more hardwoods. Talking to you or Carson if we wanted to change our forest plan? Okay, thank you.
Hardwood is a good volatile market, and I'll put it that way. You can grow it and have it stand really good and get paid really well for it. It's a short cycle time, but it can also go the opposite way. It can drop out. The prime example would be the cottonwoods along Highway 20. That was a sponsored. Basically the companies came out and leased the farmland to grow this particular high-grade pulpwood for the new version of paper. Those people on the Highway 20 are probably fine considering their stand's still standing because the company came in, leased the ground for however long it takes. Well, there's a whole lot of other people around that area that decided it was a good idea. They jumped on the bandwagon Well, the market dropped about 2 years into the program, went flat, and so then they had to pay to remove. So just realize that when you're if you change your stand for the purpose of making money, hardwoods is a good way to go because it's short cycle, and hardwood up here is alder and maple. We don't really grow much else for hardwoods. And then for production hardwoods, take that back, because you can grow Gary oak and a whole lot of other things that are good for the environment. But realize that you're rolling dice just like everything else in timber. It might get to 30 years old and look really premium and beautiful and be worth absolutely nothing, and it might just decay. So it kind of depends on what you're going for from the financial standpoint of switching your timber stand.